Well, the roster of guys who competed at ADCC was absolutely stacked. With that being said, I don't know if there's anyone who competed at ADCC in 2019 who had a tougher draw than Lachlan Giles. In his own division, he had to deal with Lucas Lepree in the first round. Lepree is a multiple-time world champion at black belt, arguably one of the best lightweight black belts in the history of the sport, and that's who Giles ends up drawing in the first round. Doesn't end up winning that match, but then goes into the absolute, and from there it's just world champion on world champion, including the current ADCC 99 kilogram champion who had won earlier in the day. He gets a win over Kaynan Duarte. He then beat Patrick Gaudio, and former world champion. Goes up against Gordon Ryan, who was a double champion ADCC this year, ends up losing that match, but then goes up against Muhammad Ali, a 2018 black belt world champion, and wins that match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some footage from each of his matches, talk about what he was doing, what worked against him, and what worked for him. In pretty much every match, he was looking for the heel hook. That was obviously what he wanted against pretty much everyone. With Lucas Lepree, Lepree decided that he would sort of play that game with him. He didn't really try to go for any heel hooks himself, but he wasn't also super averse to getting into leg entanglements and just keeping his hips back the whole time. When he was able to pass, he actually passed through the guard rather than trying to go around the guard, which is what we saw from guys like Buchecha when he was going up against Gordon Ryan, where he took out much of his passing game because he didn't want to give Gordon any chance to elevate him, get underneath him, and then get control of the leg. So we see here that he was working for a leg lock against Lucas Lepree. Lepree ends up getting free. Well, I guess not entirely free. It looks like Giles has a grip on his leg here still. But Lepree was very patient, constantly aware of where his legs were positioned and making sure to stay out of trouble. Eventually tries to pass through the guard. Here you can see, even though Giles was still trying to control, he tried that Lepree was working a knee cut to get through it. Ends up getting a nice crossface here, cuts his knee through. Doesn't fully complete the pass here. Now, Giles is able to recover, but then off that recovery, Lepree hits a similar pass and then ends up taking his back off of it. So Lepree wins this match 3-0. And he's successful by passing through the guard. And I think one of the most interesting things about this year's ADCC is that we knew coming in that there are going to be a lot of guys who are very good at heel hooks, Gordon Ryan being one of them, Lachlan Giles being another. And the question was, how were other guys going to develop their game to deal with it? Were they going to get equally good at leg locks and then just try to play that game with them? Were they going to get good enough where they were at least comfortable playing that game, but then still try to pass through it like they were passing any other guy's guard? Or would they just try to avoid it outright? And at least with Gordon Ryan, we saw a bunch of people just try to avoid it outright, and that's why Gordon only had 2 heel hooks in his 8 wins. But it seemed like with Lachlan Giles, he was able to get people to play that position with him, even if they didn't want to. And Gaudio was a good example of that. But we'll go to the next match with Kaynan Duarte. And here's the thing. If you're training jiu-jitsu or if you are helping someone else train and they aren't super familiar with leg locks, but they know they're going up against a leg locker, and they ask you, hey, look, I'm going up against a guy who's good at heel hooks. What should I do to make sure I'm safe? What are the most basic things to understand? The first thing you'd probably be told is make sure that the opponent doesn't control your knee. So once your knee line isn't controlled, you're relatively safe. And then from there, if they do control it, there's some other little things in terms of how to turn your heel inwards rather than outwards to avoid getting a heel hook. But the big thing with a lot of leg locks is if you can get your knee out, if they are not controlling your knee, you're relatively safe. And it seemed like Kaynan really played this match with that in mind. So there were a lot of times, like this time included, where his knee's out of Lachlan's control. And so he gets a little bit more comfortable than he should. And the thing with Lachlan Giles that was impressive is that even though he would oftentimes not have control of a guy's knee, he wouldn't just give up on the position. He'd still keep fighting for it, find a way to pummel back in, find a way to get control of that knee again. And oftentimes the time that he finally got control of it, he'd also have control of the heel, and he'd just rip hard on a heel hook at that point and get the tap. So we see here Kaynan just being careful, trying to make sure that his knee line isn't covered by Lachlan's hips. Again, knee's relatively safe. But here it's starting to get a little bit deeper. And off of that, Lachlan's able to get his grip on the heel, rips on it, gets the tap, and you can see by the way the leg is twisted here, that tap definitely didn't come late, that's for sure. Or it definitely didn't come early. Like you can see, knees pointed this way, heel pointed this way. That's the danger of heel hooks right there. It's a nasty move. I don't think Kaynan got injured here, but definitely a risky play with this. So then we have the match with Patrick Gaudio. Now Gaudio, for the most part, wasn't trying to let Giles get control of his legs at all. Rather than try to pass through his guard like Lucas Lepree did, Gaudio tried to stay on the outside. Giles was still pretty creative in finding ways to invert and still get a hold of Gaudio's legs. So ends up doing that here. Gaudio, once his leg is controlled, kind of plays around a little bit with it, gets a little bit comfortable in there. But for the most part, he still tries to get out, tries to pass around. But one of the things I was impressed about Lachlan Giles is that even when he would get his guard passed, even when there would be a close attempt at getting his guard passed, he was very good about recovering it, very flexible. good at inverting and still finding a way to control his guard. So even though oftentimes he'd be attacking for leg locks and he wouldn't have control of the knee, which at times can put you at risk of getting your guard passed or even getting your back taken, he was able, for the most part, at least with most opponents, to get back to guard and avoid any serious trouble. Now, granted, with Lepree, Lepree did get a pass, though he was able to quickly regard off of that. Lepree passed right off the regard and then was able to get the back after that. Similar situation with Gordon Ryan. But anyway, here with Gaudio, Giles is still able to find a way to at least get Gaudio's weight on top of him a little bit more so than what Gaudio would like here. Inverts again, gets a hold of the leg. Again, from here, it doesn't look as though he has control of Gaudio's left knee, but he's going to readjust and get control of it. Still a little bit low here. So if you're Gaudio, you're like, all right, there's some danger here, but as long as my knee is clear, I'm okay. But once Giles is ready to go, he gets it right over top of the knee, as you can see right here, and gets the tap. And from what I heard, Gaudio actually was pretty injured. He had ice on his knee and was walking around with a bit of a limp after this match. So on to the Gordon Ryan match. Now, of Giles' opponents, Ryan is obviously the most well-versed in leg locks. But even still, Giles was able to get some decent positions on him and at least make it look like he was getting close, like even here, starting to cause some danger for Gordon Ryan. Not like he was ever in close on an attempt, but he was advancing position to the point where he wasn't too far away from getting a decent attempt. But Ryan was able to counter and defend. So Ryan does a good job of here getting his knee out. Starts threatening with his own attacks. Again, this is not the best position for Gordon Ryan, but at this point, the heel isn't controlled, and he's able to spin out. So it gets his leg out again. And then sort of like what we saw with that Lucas Lepree match, Gordon Ryan eventually is going to be able to pass through his guard rather than going around his guard. And I think for the most part, a lot of the guys who tried to go around the guards of leg lockers were not very successful at this year's ADCC. So it seems as though if you're going to pass a leg locker, you kind of have to go through them. And you have to be confident that you're going to be able to fend off any attacks if they end up coming. But here we see Gordon Ryan with a really strong crossface and half guard. Wedges through, gets past. Giles goes for a regard inversion. From here, Ryan staples off of that regard attempt and is able to pass through again. And this time he's able to go to sort of like a north-south position and transfer over to side control and then into mount. For mount, he was looking for an arm triangle. Wasn't able to find it. After not finding any submissions for mount, he decides to go for a gift wrap, as you can see right here, and then take the back off of the gift wrap. And then once he gets the back, it's just what we were seeing from Gordon for most of the tournament, where he's able to use his right arm, or he's able to trap his opponent's left arm with his left leg, then use his right arm to block their right arm, and then his left arm's free to go for the choke. In this case, he ended up getting the choke with both arms, though, sort of smashed the face and gets the tap here. So then Lachlan Giles has a chance to get a medal at ADCC as a 77 kilogram guy in the absolute bracket. Goes against Ali. Ali, again, it seemed like he was of the understanding where if his knee line's free, he's relatively safe, and that didn't really work out with Giles. So again, Giles is trying to fight for his leg locks. Pretty close in here. If you look at the clock here, this is 8:52. He taps at 8:48. So this is 4 seconds before he taps. If you look at the position here, he's controlling this leg here. His knee, while it is kind of in danger, it's not as though he doesn't have space to pull out. If he wants to just like burst or sort of just I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, but if he tries to sort of like quickly move in this direction over to his right or over to our right, he's probably okay here, but he's patient. He's like, all right, my knee really isn't controlled that well. I'm relatively safe here. And he finds himself in a position where he thinks he's safer than he actually is. Giles ends up rolling through with the heel and gets the tap. So Lachlan Giles goes 3-2, 3 submission wins, all by heel hook. Gets a spot on the podium, finishes with a ADCC bronze medal in the absolute, and it'll be interesting to see where his name goes from here, how he's able to build his star off of this. But if what his student did in 2017 is any indication, that being Craig Jones, a lot of good things are to come for Lachlan Giles. He had a really good performance in a show on the UFC Fight Pass that was like a cheap quintet. I think it was called Connectic, where it was teams of 5. And he went out against the entire team and tapped the entire team. So there were other 4 guys on his team didn't even have to go out and do anything. So Lachlan Giles seems like he's on the way right now to becoming a big star, not just as a guy who makes interesting YouTube videos, not as a guy who has good instructionals, but as a guy who's an excellent competitor on top of that.